He signed the divorce papers mocking me, until the judge read my brother's will out loud hash revenge. The courtroom smelled of old wood and broken promises. I sat at the defendant's table, my hands folded in my lap, fingers interlaced so tightly my knuckles had gone white. Across from me, Marcus leaned back in his chair with the casual confidence of a man who believed he'd already won. His designer suit, Italian, probably cost more than I'd spent on groceries in 6 months, draped perfectly across his shoulders. He caught my eye and smirked, that same condescending half-smile I'd grown to know so well over the past 3 years. "All rise," the bailiff announced, and we stood as Judge Patricia Morrison entered. She was a woman in her late 50s, with silver hair pulled back in a neat bun and reading glasses perched on her nose. I'd heard she was fair, but no nonsense. I hoped that was true. As we settled back into our seats, Marcus's attorney, Gerald Chen, sleek, expensive, with a reputation for bleeding spouses dry in divorce proceedings, shuffled through his papers with theatrical precision. He'd been the one to suggest this court date specifically. I hadn't understood why until now. "Your Honor," Gerald began, standing with practiced ease, "this should be a fairly straightforward proceeding. My client, Mr. Marcus Whitfield, is seeking dissolution of marriage from Ms. Sarah Whitfield, née Coleman. Given the prenuptial agreement and the disparity in financial contribution to the marriage, we believe the settlement terms are more than generous." I felt my stomach tight. The prenup. Of course. I'd signed it 7 years ago, young and in love, believing that love would be enough. That document, I'd learned, protected everything Marcus had brought into the marriage and earned during it. I was entitled to almost nothing. My attorney, Robert Martinez, a kind man in his 60s who'd taken my case at a reduced rate because I reminded him of his daughter, stood slowly. "Your Honor, while there is indeed a prenuptial agreement, we have concerns about the circumstances under which it was signed, and we'd like to address the contributions Ms. Whitfield made to..." Marcus's laugh cut through the courtroom, sharp and dismissive. Judge Morrison's gaze snapped to him, her expression stern. "Mr. Whitfield," she said coolly, "you will maintain appropriate courtroom decorum." "My apologies, Your Honor," Marcus said, but his eyes were dancing with amusement. He leaned toward his attorney and whispered something that made Gerald suppress a smile. I knew what they were thinking. What contributions? I'd been a substitute teacher, making barely enough to cover my own expenses. I'd given up my dreams of becoming a full-time educator to support Marcus's career moves, relocating 3 times in 5 years as he climbed the corporate ladder. But none of that mattered in the cold calculus of divorce law. I'd contributed love, time, emotional labor. None of it held up in court. "Continue, Mr. Martinez," Judge Morrison said. "Thank you, Your Honor." My client dedicated 7 years to this marriage, supporting Mr. Whitfield through multiple career transitions, managing their household and playing house, Marcus muttered, just loud enough for me to hear. Gerald placed a warning hand on his arm, but Marcus was enjoying himself too much to stop. "While I built an actual career." "Mr. Whitfield," Judge Morrison's voice cracked like a whip, "I will not warn you again. Another outburst and I will hold you in contempt." Marcus straightened, composing his features into something resembling contrition, but I saw the gleam in his eyes. He thought this was funny. He thought I was funny, pathetic Sarah who'd foolishly married above her station and was now learning the cost of dreaming too big. My phone buzzed in my purse, a soft vibration I felt against my hip. I ignored it. Whatever it was, it could wait. Nothing could be more important than this moment, this dismantling of my life. Robert continued presenting our case, such as it was. He talked about my sacrifices, my support, my role in maintaining the household that had allowed Marcus to focus on his career. He mentioned that I'd postponed my master's degree, that I'd left positions at schools I loved to follow Marcus across state lines. He painted a picture of a woman who'd invested everything into a partnership, only to find herself with nothing when it ended. Gerald Chen responded with clinical efficiency. "Your Honor, Ms. Whitfield is an adult who made her own choices. She signed a prenuptial agreement with full knowledge of its terms, with independent legal counsel present. She has no children to support, no disabilities preventing her from working. My client is offering her $20,000 as a settlement, considerably more than the agreement requires, along with the furniture from their guest bedroom and her personal vehicle, which is already in her name. This is more than fair. $20,000 for 7 years of my life. For every dinner I'd cooked while Marcus worked late, every client event I'd smiled through while he networked, every time I'd swallowed my own ambitions to celebrate his promotions. $20,000. My phone buzzed again, and again. Judge Morrison noticed. "Ms. Whitfield, please silence your phone." "I apologize, Your Honor," I whispered, reaching into my purse. As I pulled out my phone to turn it off, I saw the screen. 5 missed calls. 7 text messages, all from the same number, Arnold Hutchinson, my brother Daniel's attorney. My heart stopped. Daniel, my twin brother, my other half, the only family I had left after our parents died in a car accident when we were 19. Daniel, who'd been sick for the past 2 years, fighting pancreatic cancer with the same quiet determination he'd approached everything in life. Daniel, who'd been in hospice for the past 3 months. The most recent text read, "Sarah, please call immediately, urgent matter regarding Daniel's estate." The world seemed to tilt, estate, past tense. My brother was gone. I stood abruptly, my chair scraping against the floor. The room spun, and I gripped the table for support. "Ms. Whitfield?" Judge Morrison's voice seemed to come from far away. "Your Honor, my voice cracked. I need a recess, please." "It's my brother, I think he's—" Robert was beside me instantly, his hand on my elbow, steadying me. He looked at the judge, understanding in his eyes. "Your Honor, if we could have a brief recess." Marcus's voice cut through my grief like a knife. "Oh, come on, really? We're doing this now, the poor sick brother card?" I turned to look at him, this man I'd loved and saw only a stranger. A cruel stranger who'd forgotten that he'd met Daniel dozens of times, who'd sat across from him at Thanksgiving dinners, who'd shaken his hand at our wedding. "Marcus," I said softly, my voice surprisingly steady despite the tears beginning to stream down my face. "My brother is dead." For just a moment, so brief I might have imagined it, something flickered in Marcus's eyes. Surprise, remorse, but it vanished as quickly as it appeared, replaced by irritation. "I'm sorry for your loss," he said, but the words were perfunctory, hollow. "But we've all taken time out of our schedules for this. Can't we just sign the papers and be done with it?" Judge Morrison's expression had turned to stone. "Mr. Whitfield, a woman has just learned of her brother's death. We will recess for 1 hour. When we return, you will show appropriate respect, or you will find yourself facing consequences. Is that clear?" "Crystal, Your Honor," Marcus said, but I heard the eye roll in his voice. I barely registered the judge's gavel, the sounds of people standing, the courtroom emptying. Robert guided me to a small conference room down the hall. I sat heavily in a chair and dialed Arnold's number with shaking fingers. He answered on the first ring. "Sarah, I'm so sorry. Daniel passed peacefully this morning at 6:47 a.m. He wasn't in pain. The hospice nurses said he just slipped away in his sleep." I couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. Daniel was dead. My twin, my best friend, the one person who'd always understood me without words, who'd supported every dream I'd ever had, who'd been my anchor when our parents died and again when my marriage fell apart. "Gone. Sarah," Arnold's voice was gentle. "Are you there?" "Yes," I managed. "I'm here. I'm in court, actually. Divorce proceedings." "Oh," there was a pause. "I didn't realize that was today. Do you need to call me back?" "No, please." "Tell me about Daniel. What happened? Was anyone with him?" "I was there," Arnold said, and I could hear the emotion in his voice. Daniel had been more than a client to him. They'd become genuine friends over the years. "I'd stopped by early to bring him some books. We talked for a while about you, actually. He asked me to make sure you got his letter." "Letter?" "Yes, he wrote you a letter, asked me to give it to you personally after he passed. But Sarah, there's something else, something important. Daniel made me promise to be there when the will is read. He insisted it happen in a formal setting with all interested parties present." I frowned, trying to focus through my grief. "All interested parties? Arnold, there's only me. Daniel didn't have anyone else." "Actually," Arnold said carefully, "he specified that the will reading should include you and your husband, or soon-to-be ex-husband, I suppose." "Marcus." I couldn't have been more shocked if he'd said Daniel wanted the Pope present. "Why would Marcus need to be there? Daniel barely tolerated him." "I can't say more, Sarah. Attorney-client privilege, and Daniel was very specific about how this should unfold. But it's crucial that Marcus be present. When can you both be available?" I looked out the conference room window at the courthouse hallway where I could see Marcus through the glass. He was on his phone, laughing about something, completely unbothered by the fact that my world had just shattered. "We're in court now," I said slowly. "The judge called a 1-hour recess, but after that we're supposed to finalize the divorce." "Perfect," Arnold said, and there was something in his tone, something almost like anticipation. "Ask your attorney to request that the will reading be incorporated into today's proceedings. Daniel's estate has implications for the divorce settlement. Judge Morrison will want to hear this." "Implications? Arnold, what are you talking about?" Daniel had nothing. He was a social worker who spent his entire life helping others. He lived in a modest apartment, drove a 15-year-old Honda. What kind of estate could possibly affect my divorce? "Trust me, Sarah," Arnold said softly. "Ask your attorney to make the request. Daniel wanted it this way. He planned every detail very carefully." After we hung up, I sat in the silence of the conference room, trying to process everything. Daniel was gone. That reality kept trying to crash over me, but I couldn't let it yet. Not here, not now. I needed to be strong for one more hour. Robert returned with a cup of water and a handful of tissues. "Take your time," he said kindly. "We can request a continuance if you need more time to grieve." "No," I said, wiping my eyes. "Actually, I need you to request something else." I explained about Daniel's will, about Arnold's insistence that Marcus be present, about the mysterious implications for the divorce settlement. Robert's eyebrows rose. "That's unusual, but if Daniel's attorney says the estate has bearing on the divorce, the judge will allow it. Let me make some calls." When we reconvened an hour later, the atmosphere in the courtroom had shifted. Marcus was annoyed, tapping his fingers impatiently on the table, clearly irritated by the delay. Gerald Chen looked curious but wary. Judge Morrison studied me with something that might have been sympathy. "Ms. Whitfield," she said gently, "I'm sorry for your loss. Mr. Martinez has explained the situation regarding your brother's estate. Mr. Hutchinson, the estate attorney, is on his way and should arrive within 20 minutes. Given the unusual circumstances, I've agreed to allow the will reading to proceed as part of these proceedings, as it may have bearing on the settlement. Do you understand?" "Yes, Your Honor, thank you." Marcus leaned toward Gerald, whispering urgently. Gerald nodded, then stood. "Your Honor, with all due respect, I'm not clear on why my client needs to be present for the reading of Ms. Whitfield's brother's will. This seems like a delay tactic. Mr. Hutchinson specifically requested Mr. Whitfield's presence, Mr. Chen. As the estate apparently has implications for the divorce settlement under consideration, I've determined it's relevant. Your client may certainly leave if he wishes, but that would necessitate rescheduling these proceedings." I watched Marcus's jaw tighten. He hated inefficiency, hated anything that disrupted his carefully planned schedule. He looked at his watch, a Rolex, naturally, and I could see him doing the calculation. Stay and waste another hour, or leave and waste several more days rescheduling. "We'll stay," he said tersely. Those 20 minutes felt like hours. I sat in my chair numb, trying not to think about Daniel, about the fact that I'd never hear his laugh again, never get one of his thoughtful texts, never sit across from him at a diner at 2 a.m. talking about everything and nothing. Trying not to remember the last time I'd visited him in hospice, how thin he'd become, how his eyes had still sparkled with warmth even as his body failed him. "I'm proud of you, Sarah," he'd said that day, his voice weak but firm. "Don't let anyone make you feel small. Promise me." I'd promised. But sitting in that courtroom, about to sign away 7 years of my life for $20,000 while Marcus smirked at me, I felt smaller than I ever had. Finally, Arnold Hutchinson arrived. He was a tall man in his 50s with kind eyes and a leather briefcase that had seen better days. He nodded to me, his expression conveying more sympathy than words could. Then he approached the bench. "Your Honor, thank you for allowing me to proceed. I'm Arnold Hutchinson, attorney for the estate of Daniel Marcus Coleman. I have with me the last will and testament of the deceased, properly witnessed and notarized. As executrix of the will, I believe its contents are directly relevant to the divorce proceedings currently under consideration." Judge Morrison gestured to the witness stand. "Please, Mr. Hutchinson, for the record, when did Mr. Coleman pass away?" "This morning at 6:47 a.m., Your Honor. He'd been in hospice care for the past 3 months, battling pancreatic cancer. He'd been very specific about the terms of his will and had insisted it be read in a formal legal setting with both his sister Sarah and her husband Marcus present." Marcus shifted uncomfortably. I saw him glance at Gerald, who looked puzzled. Arnold opened his briefcase and withdrew a document, along with a sealed envelope. "Before I read the will, Daniel left a letter for his sister. With the court's permission, I'd like to give it to her now." Judge Morrison nodded. Arnold walked to our table and handed me the envelope. My name was written on it in Daniel's familiar handwriting, slightly messy, tilting to the right. My hands shook as I opened it. The letter was 2 pages, and I read it silently while the courtroom waited. "My dearest Sarah, if you're reading this, then I'm gone, and you're probably in that courtroom fighting for scraps from a man who never deserved you. I'm sorry I couldn't be there in person to see the look on Marcus's face when he realizes what a colossal mistake he made. There's so much I want to say to you, but I'll start with this. You were always the smart one, the kind one, the one who saw the best in everyone. That's a gift, Sarah, but it's also made you vulnerable to people like Marcus, people who mistake kindness for weakness, generosity for desperation. I know you think I was just your struggling social worker brother, living paycheck to paycheck, barely scraping by. You were always trying to help me, offering me money I never accepted, worrying about my finances even when you had so little yourself. Do you remember when you sent me $500 for my birthday 3 years ago, insisting I treat myself to something nice. You just sold Mom's old necklace to send me that money, Sarah. I knew because you mentioned it in your email, thinking I'd be happy you'd found a way to help me. What you didn't know was that I had immediately transferred it to a trust fund I'd set up in your name. Every penny you ever sent me, I saved for you. Because I knew even then that Marcus would leave you with nothing. But there's more to the story, and you need to know all of it before Arnold reads my will. Are you ready? Take a deep breath. This is going to be a lot. Do you remember when Dad used to take us to visit Uncle Raymond in California? You were always so focused on the beach and the sunshine that you never paid much attention to what Uncle Raymond did for a living. I did, though. I listened to all his stories about investing, about the stock market, about taking calculated risks. When Mom and Dad died and we each inherited $50,000, you put yours toward your education and living expenses, a smart, practical choice. I told you I was using mine for social work school. That was partially true. I did get my degree. But I also took $35,000 of that inheritance and invested it based on everything Uncle Raymond had taught me. I got lucky, Sarah, really lucky. I invested in a small tech startup that a friend from college was launching. It was a ridiculous gamble, I knew that, but something told me to believe in him. That company was acquired 5 years later for $800 million. My initial investment had become worth $8 million. $8 million, Sarah. Your struggling social worker brother was a multimillionaire. I never told you. I never told anyone except Arnold. I kept living in my modest apartment, driving my old Honda, working at the community center, helping kids and families. Do you know why? Because that was the life that made me happy. The money didn't change who I was or what mattered to me, but I invested wisely. I diversified. I worked with Arnold to create trusts and investment portfolios. By the time you're reading this letter, that $8 million has grown to just over $24 million. $20 $4 million. I know you're shocked. I know you probably don't believe it, but it's all true and it's all documented. Arnold has all the financial records. Now here's the part that involves Marcus, and here's why I insisted he be present for this reading. Stay strong, Sarah. Remember that I love you. About 4 years ago, I started noticing changes in how Marcus treated you. The dismissive comments, the way he made you feel small. I'd call you and you'd try to sound happy, but I could always hear the sadness underneath. We were twins, remember? We could never hide anything from each other, so I did what any good brother would do. I started paying attention to Marcus more carefully. I had dinner with you both whenever I visited. I watched, I listened, and I didn't like what I saw. 2 years ago when we had that barbecue at your house, do you remember? Marcus got drunk and pulled me aside. He told me, laughing, that he was counting down the days until you hit your 7-year anniversary so he could trade up without you getting half his assets. He said the prenup was the smartest thing he'd ever done. He actually said he'd invested 7 years in keeping you placated, and that soon he'd be free to find someone worthy of his success. I wanted to punch him, Sarah. I wanted to tell you right then. But I knew you loved him, or thought you did, and I knew you wouldn't believe me. He'd made you doubt yourself so thoroughly that you'd think I was just being an overprotective brother, so I did something else. I made a plan. I started documenting everything. Every time Marcus said something dismissive about you when he thought I wasn't paying attention. Every time he checked his phone during conversations with you and I saw the name, Jennifer, pop up in his messages. Every time he rolled his eyes when you talked about your teaching or your dreams. I hired a private investigator. I know, it sounds extreme, but I needed to know if my suspicions were correct. They were. Marcus has been having an affair with his colleague Jennifer Wallace for the past 18 months. The investigator has photographs, hotel receipts, text messages, everything. I've given all of it to Arnold, along with instructions that it should only be revealed if Marcus tries to paint you as the one at fault in the divorce, or if he attempts to challenge the terms of my will. Because here's the thing about that prenup you signed, Sarah. It has a clause. A clause that Marcus's expensive lawyer probably thought would never be relevant. If either party is proven to have committed adultery during the marriage, the prenup is void. Completely void. Marcus has been so confident, so sure that you'd never find out about Jennifer, that he's walked around like he's already won. He probably already has the divorce papers drawn up, giving you barely enough to survive while he keeps everything he's built in part on your support and sacrifices. But here's what he doesn't know. I've been building something too, building a case, building a future for you, building your freedom. Now about my will. Sarah, I'm leaving everything to you, all $24 million. The investment portfolios, the properties I bought, the trusts I established, all of it. I know what you're thinking, you don't want it. You'd rather have me? I know, sweetheart. I'd rather be there too. But since I can't be, I want to make sure you're taken care of. I want you to have the freedom to pursue your dreams, to go back to school, to teach at the best institutions, to never have to compromise yourself for anyone again. But here's the part that involves Marcus, and here's why I wanted him in that courtroom when Arnold reads this will. Asterisk under the terms of the prenup Marcus had you sign, any assets or inheritance you receive during the marriage are considered separate property, not subject to division in divorce, unless the divorce is finalized. If you're still legally married when you inherit my estate, it's yours alone. Marcus can't touch it. But if he's already convinced you to sign the divorce papers, if he's pushed through the proceedings before you knew about your inheritance, then depending on state law and the timing, he might have been able to argue for a portion of it, claiming you acquired it during the marriage. That's why I timed this so carefully, Sarah. That's why I asked Arnold to make sure the will was read before the divorce was finalized. I wanted Marcus to know, to sit there and realize that he threw away a woman who was about to become a multimillionaire. I wanted him to understand exactly what he lost when he chose to devalue you. Is this revenge? Maybe a little. I won't lie, I enjoyed imagining his face when he found out. But more than that, it's justice. It's making sure he understands that your worth was never determined by your bank account, and that his calculations about trading up were based on values that were always wrong. You are worth everything, Sarah, with or without money, with or without Marcus. You always were, but now you have the means to prove it not to him, but to yourself. Live well, little sister. Yes, I was born 3 minutes before you. I get to call you that. Live freely. Live joyfully. Find someone who sees your worth without having to be shown a bank statement. Travel, teach, make a difference. Do all the things we talked about doing when we were kids, and when you think of me, don't cry. Okay, cry a little. But then remember that I died knowing you'd be okay, that you'd be more than okay, that you'd be free. I love you forever, Daniel. P.S. Marcus, if you're reading over Sarah's shoulder and knowing you probably are, I hope you're enjoying this. You had a woman who would have given you the world, and you treated her like she was worthless. You wanted to trade up. You just traded down from a multimillionaire. How's that expensive education and business acumen working out for you now? P.P.S. Sarah, Arnold has the file on Marcus's affair. Use it if you need to. Don't let him walk away unscathed if he tries to hurt you. But honestly, I think just knowing what he lost will hurt him more than any lawsuit ever could. I read the letter twice, my hands shaking, tears streaming down my face. Around me, the courtroom was silent. I looked up to find everyone watching me, Judge Morrison with gentle concern, Robert with curiosity, Marcus with growing alarm. Ms. Whitfield, Judge Morrison said quietly, are you ready to proceed? I nodded, unable to speak. I folded the letter carefully and held it against my chest. Daniel. My brilliant, kind, thoughtful brother had been protecting me all along, even as I'd worried about him, even as I'd tried to help him with money he'd never needed. Arnold cleared his throat. Your Honor, with the court's permission, I'll now read the last will and testament of Daniel Marcus Coleman. Proceed, Judge Morrison said. Arnold's voice filled the courtroom, formal and clear. I, Daniel Marcus Coleman, being of sound mind and body, do hereby declare this to be my last will and testament. I revoke all previous wills and codicils. First, I direct that all my debts and funeral expenses be paid from my estate. Second, I make the following specific bequests. He went through the preliminaries, small amounts to various charities Daniel had supported, his personal items to friends from the community center. Then he reached the main section, and his voice took on extra weight. To my beloved sister, Sarah Jane Coleman Whitfield, I leave the entirety of my remaining estate, including but not limited to all investment portfolios held with Franklin and Marshall Investment Group, current value approximately $18.7 million. All real estate holdings, including the properties at 2847 Berkshire Avenue, Boston, Massachusetts, and 492 Ocean Vista Drive, San Diego, California, combined current value approximately $3.8 million. All funds held in accounts at First National Bank and Pacific Coast Credit Union, totaling approximately $1.2 million. And all other assets, personal property, and holdings not otherwise specified, estimated value $300,000. The courtroom erupted. Marcus shot to his feet, his face going from pale to red in seconds. What? That's impossible. Daniel was a social worker. He lived in a one-bedroom apartment. Mr. Whitfield, Judge Morrison's voice cracked like thunder. Sit down. But Marcus wasn't listening. He turned to Gerald, his voice rising. This is a scam, some kind of fraud. There's no way her loser brother had $24 million. No way. I sat frozen, watching my husband's soon-to-be ex-husband unravel. 7 years of condescension, of being made to feel less than, of listening to him brag about his success while dismissing my contributions, and now this. Marcus, realizing he'd calculated everything wrong. Gerald was frantically typing on his phone, probably trying to verify the information. Arnold simply waited unruffled, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Mr. Whitfield," Judge Morrison said coldly, "you will sit down and be silent, or you will be removed from this courtroom. Do I make myself clear?" Marcus sat, but his hands were shaking. He stared at me like he'd never seen me before. Arnold continued, his voice steady. "Furthermore, I direct my executor to ensure that all documentation regarding the estate's value and holdings be made available to any interested parties involved in divorce proceedings that may be ongoing at the time of my death. It is my intention that my sister Sarah receive her inheritance free and clear of any marital claims, as is her right under the prenuptial agreement she signed, which specifically protects inheritances received by either party as separate property." He paused, then added, "I would also like the following statement read into the record. To my sister Sarah, you were always rich in the ways that mattered. Now you're rich in the ways the world understands too. Don't let anyone ever make you feel small again. And to Marcus Whitfield, you chose poorly. Live with that." The silence that followed was deafening. I looked at Marcus, really looked at him, and saw him seeing me, truly seeing me for the first time in years. Not as the simple substitute teacher he'd married and grown to dismiss. Not as the woman he'd spent 7 years with while planning his exit. But as someone who just inherited more money than he'd likely ever see in his lifetime. "Sarah," he said, and his voice had changed completely. Gone was the condescension, the dismissiveness. Now he sounded almost plaintive. "Sarah, we should talk about this, about us. Maybe we've been too hasty with the divorce. We could go to counseling, work things out." "No," I said. The word came out stronger than I'd expected. "No, Marcus, we're done. But Sarah, be reasonable. 7 years of marriage, we have history together, we can—" "Mr. Whitfield," Judge Morrison interrupted, and her voice was ice. "Do you seriously expect this court to believe that your sudden change of heart has nothing to do with the inheritance Ms. Whitfield just learned about?" Marcus opened his mouth, closed it. He looked at Gerald, who gave a tiny shake of his head. Robert stood, and I heard the satisfaction in his voice. "Your Honor, in light of this new information, my client would like to proceed with the divorce as originally planned. However, we'd like to address the settlement terms. Given that Ms. Whitfield's inheritance is protected under the prenuptial agreement as separate property, and given Mr. Whitfield's behavior both during the marriage and in this courtroom today, we believe the current settlement offer is inadequate." "Inadequate?" Gerald sputtered. "Your Honor, the prenup clearly states—" "The prenup," Robert interrupted smoothly, "also contains a clause regarding adultery. I believe Mr. Hutchinson has some additional documentation that may be relevant." I watched the color drain from Marcus's face as Arnold reached into his briefcase again and withdrew a thick manila folder. "Your Honor," Arnold said, "Daniel Coleman hired a private investigator approximately 18 months ago to document his brother-in-law's activities. The investigator's report contains photographic evidence, hotel receipts, phone records, and text message transcripts documenting an ongoing affair between Marcus Whitfield and a Jennifer Wallace, a colleague at his firm. The prenuptial agreement in question contains a standard infidelity clause, rendering it void if either party can be proven to have committed adultery during the marriage." Marcus looked like he might be sick. Gerald was flipping through pages of the prenup, his face growing increasingly grim. "These allegations," Marcus started, but Gerald put a hand on his arm, stopping him. "Your Honor," Gerald said, and for the first time he sounded uncertain, "we'd like to request a recess to review this documentation and consult with our client." Judge Morrison looked at the clock, then at all of us, her expression thoughtful. "I think that's wise. We'll recess until Monday at 9 a.m. Mr. Hutchinson, please file copies of all relevant documentation with the court. Mr. Chen, I suggest you review that material very carefully and discuss your options with your client. And Mr. Whitfield," she looked at Marcus with barely concealed disgust, "I suggest you think very carefully about how you want to proceed. Attempting to defraud a spouse in divorce proceedings is not something this court takes lightly." She banged her gavel, and the courtroom began to empty. I sat still, clutching Daniel's letter, feeling like I was in a dream, or maybe waking up from one. Marcus approached our table, but Robert stepped between us protectively. "My client has nothing to say to you, Mr. Whitfield." "Sarah, please," Marcus said, trying to look around Robert. Just 5 minutes. Let me explain about Jennifer. It's not what you think. It's exactly what I think, I said quietly, standing to face him. It's exactly what Daniel knew. He saw who you really were, Marcus. He saw it years ago. I just couldn't see it until now. You can't seriously believe your brother had $24 million, Marcus said, and I heard the desperation in his voice. It's some kind of trick, some elaborate, all documented and verified, Mr. Whitfield, Arnold said, closing his briefcase with a decisive snap. Multiple independent audits, all tax filings up to date, every penny accounted for. Daniel was many things, but sloppy with financial documentation wasn't one of them. Marcus stared at me, and I saw it happening in real time, saw him recalculating, reassessing, trying to find an angle. Sarah, we can both benefit from this. If you withdraw the divorce petition, we stay married, we can be partners, real partners, like we were before, I asked softly. When I was making $35,000 a year as a substitute teacher and you made me feel like I was contributing nothing. When you laughed about me with your colleagues. When you were planning your exit strategy while I was planning our future. You did, Marcus. You did all of it. And you know what? I might have never realized it without Daniel forcing me to see it. He always saw the best in me, even when I couldn't see it myself. He saw my worth when you couldn't. When you wouldn't, I picked up my purse, Daniel's letter still clutched in my hand. Robert, can we go? I need to start making arrangements for my brother's funeral. Of course, Sarah, Robert said gently. As we walked toward the courtroom doors, Marcus called out one more time. Sarah, don't do this. We can work this out. I turned back, and I saw him clearly for the first time, not the confident, successful man I'd married, but someone smaller. Someone who'd spent 7 years treating me like I was beneath him, only to discover he'd been the one beneath me all along. Goodbye, Marcus, I said. Sign the papers. I'll see you Monday to finalize everything. Out in the courthouse hallway, Arnold pulled me aside. Sarah, there's one more thing. Daniel left specific instructions about his funeral. He wanted it to be small, just close friends and people from the community center. But he also set aside $50,000 to create a memorial scholarship fund in your parents' names at the school where you teach. He said you'd know what to do with it. Fresh tears welled up. Of course Daniel had thought of that. Of course he'd found a way to honor our parents while helping others. He was so proud of you, Arnold continued. Every time we met, he talked about you, about your kindness, your dedication to your students, your resilience. He said you were the strongest person he knew, even if you didn't see it yourself. I need to tell you something, I said, my voice breaking. The last time I visited Daniel in hospice, he made me promise not to let anyone make me feel small. I promised him, and then I walked into that courtroom today ready to take $20,000 and walk away from 7 years of my life because I believed that was all I deserved. But you didn't walk away, Arnold said gently. You're still standing. That's what Daniel knew you'd do. Robert joined us, his expression serious. Sarah, we need to talk about Monday. With the evidence of adultery, the prenup is void. That means the divorce becomes a standard asset division case. You're entitled to half of everything Marcus accumulated during the marriage. I don't want his money, I said immediately. I understand that, but there's also the matter of your inheritance. Even without the prenup, inheritances are typically considered separate property. However, the timing is delicate. We need to ensure that the divorce doesn't finalize before the estate is fully transferred to you, just to eliminate any possible complications. Arnold nodded. I'll expedite the estate proceedings. With everything properly documented, we should have the transfers completed within a few weeks. I'd recommend waiting until then to finalize the divorce. Which gives Marcus a few weeks to squirm and fully realize what he's lost, Robert added with a slight smile. If that matters to you. I thought about it. Did I want Marcus to suffer? Part of me, the part that was still hurt, still angry, said yes. But Daniel's letter echoed in my mind, live well, little sister, live freely, live joyfully. I don't need him to suffer, I said slowly. I just need to be free of him. How long will the estate transfers take? 2 to 3 weeks, assuming no complications, Arnold said. Then we'll finalize the divorce after that. But Robert, I don't want to drag this out trying to get half of Marcus's assets. I just want out. Sarah, you're entitled. I know what I'm entitled to, but I also know I don't want to spend months or years in litigation with him. Let him keep his money. I have more than enough now, thanks to Daniel. I want this over. Robert studied me for a moment, then nodded. All right. We'll propose a simple division. He keeps his assets, you keep yours. Clean break. Clean break, I agreed. The next 3 weeks passed in a blur of funeral arrangements, grief, and paperwork. Daniel's funeral was exactly as he'd wanted it. Small, intimate, filled with people whose lives he'd touched through his social work. Person after person stood up to share stories about how Daniel had helped them, supported them, believed in them when no one else would. One young man, probably in his early 20s, spoke through tears about how Daniel had kept him from dropping out of high school, had helped him apply for college scholarships, had attended his graduation when his own parents wouldn't. "Mr. C believed in me when I didn't believe in myself," he said. "He told me I was capable of amazing things. He was right." Sitting in that church listening to story after story, I realized something profound. Daniel had been rich long before he'd made his millions. He'd been rich in relationships, in impact, in purpose. The money had just been a tool he'd used to protect me, to ensure I'd have the freedom to make the same kind of difference he'd made in his own way. Marcus didn't come to the funeral. I hadn't expected him to. But Jennifer Wallace did, surprisingly. She approached me after the service, her eyes red. "I'm so sorry for your loss," she said. He was a remarkable person." I looked at her, this woman who'd been sleeping with my husband for 18 months. I should have hated her, but looking at her face, I just felt tired. "Did you know he was still married?" I asked quietly. She flinched. "At first, no. By the time I found out, I was all ready." She trailed off, then straightened her shoulders. "There's no excuse." I knew, and I continued anyway. I told myself the story Marcus told me, that you were separated, that it was just a matter of paperwork, that the marriage had been over for years. But I knew that wasn't completely true. "I'm sorry." "Are you two still together?" She shook her head. "I broke it off last week. After what happened in court, after finding out how he'd talked about you, how he'd planned everything, I realized I didn't know him at all. Or maybe I did and I just didn't want to see it." I studied her face and saw genuine remorse there. "Jennifer, I'm not going to tell you to stay away from him or that he's a terrible person. You'll figure out what you need to figure out. But I will tell you this, anyone who spends 7 years making someone feel worthless isn't someone who's suddenly going to make you feel valuable. That's not about you or me. That's about him." She nodded, tears spilling over. "I'm sorry," she said again and walked away. "Arnold called me on a Thursday afternoon, 3 weeks after Daniel's death. 'Sarah, the estate transfers are complete. Everything is in your name now. You're officially a very wealthy woman.' 'I'm officially a woman who lost her brother,' I corrected gently. "That too," Arnold said softly. "I've sent all the documentation to Robert. You can proceed with finalizing the divorce whenever you're ready." The final court date was surprisingly anticlimactic. Marcus arrived with Gerald, both of them looking resigned. The evidence of infidelity had left them with no leverage, and I think Marcus had finally realized that dragging things out would only cost him more in legal fees. Judge Morrison reviewed our settlement agreement. Marcus kept all his assets, I kept mine, including my inheritance. Clean break, just as I'd wanted. "Mr. Whitfield," Judge Morrison said, looking at Marcus over her reading glasses, "do you understand and agree to these terms?" "Yes, Your Honor," Marcus said quietly. "Ms. Whitfield?" "Yes, Your Honor." "Very well, this court grants the dissolution of marriage between Marcus Whitfield and Sarah Coleman Whitfield, effective immediately. You're both free to go." That was it. 7 years ended in less than 5 minutes. As we left the courtroom, Marcus caught up with me in the hallway. "Sarah, wait." I turned, surprised. He looked older, somehow tired. "I just wanted to say I'm sorry for all of it. For how I treated you, for Jennifer, for not seeing what I had until it was gone. You deserved better." I looked at him, this man I'd loved, and felt nothing, not anger, not sadness, just a sort of peaceful indifference. "Yes," I agreed simply. "I did deserve better. I hope you figure out why you couldn't give it to me, not for my sake, but for yours. For what it's worth, Daniel was right about you. You were always rich in the ways that mattered. I just couldn't see it." "Goodbye, Marcus," I said, and this time I meant it. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't hurt. I was just done. 6 months later, I was standing in my new office at Columbia University, where I'd just been hired as a professor of education. The view from my window overlooked the campus, students rushing between classes with backpacks and coffee cups, living the kind of life I'd once dreamed of living. I'd used part of Daniel's inheritance to endow the memorial scholarship fund he'd wanted, not just $50,000, but $2 million, enough to send dozens of students to college every year in our parents' names. I'd set up a foundation to continue Daniel's social work, helping at-risk youth find their paths. And I'd gone back to school myself, finally finishing that master's degree I'd postponed. Turns out when you don't have to worry about money, you can focus on what really matters, learning, growing, becoming the person you're meant to be. My phone buzzed with a text from Arnold. "Thought you should know the first scholarships have been awarded. Daniel would be proud." I looked at the photo on my desk, Daniel and me at our parents' anniversary party years ago, both of us laughing at something our father had said. We looked so young, so hopeful. I'm trying to live well, I told his picture softly. Like you asked me to, I'm trying to be free. A knock on my office door interrupted my thoughts. One of my graduate students, a young woman named Maria who reminded me a bit of myself at that age, poked her head in. Professor Coleman, sorry to interrupt. I just wanted to thank you again for writing that recommendation letter. I got into the doctoral program at Stanford. Maria, that's wonderful. I stood up and hugged her. You earned it. Your research proposal was brilliant. I almost didn't apply, she admitted. I didn't think I was good enough, but you told me I was capable of amazing things, and you were right. After she left, I sat back down at my desk and opened my laptop. There was an email from Marcus, the first one in months. I almost deleted it without reading, but curiosity got the better of me. Sarah, I know I have no right to contact you, and you don't have to respond to this. I just thought you should know that I've been in therapy for the past few months, trying to understand why I behaved the way I did during our marriage. I'm not making excuses, but I think I finally understand something. I was so focused on external measures of success, money, status, appearance, that I couldn't see the value in anything else. I couldn't see your value, even though it was right in front of me every day. I saw your interview in the Chronicle about the Scholarship Foundation. Your brother was right, you were always rich in the ways that mattered. I'm glad you're using his gift to help others. That's exactly what he would have wanted. I don't expect forgiveness, and I'm not asking for anything. I just wanted you to know that I'm trying to be better, not for you, but because I finally understand that the person I was, the person who could treat someone like you the way I did, is not someone I want to be. I hope you're happy, Sarah. You deserve to be. Marcus, I read it twice, then closed the laptop. Maybe Marcus was genuinely changing. Maybe he'd learned something from all this, or maybe not. Either way, it wasn't my concern anymore. My phone buzzed again, a reminder for dinner with Arnold and his wife. They'd become good friends over the months since Daniel's death, and we met regularly to talk about the foundation and Daniel's legacy. But tonight was just dinner, just friendship, just living. I grabbed my coat and took one last look around my office, in a job I loved, in a life I'd built for myself. A life Daniel had made possible, not just with his money, but with his belief in me. Thank you, I whispered to his picture. For everything, for believing in me when I couldn't believe in myself, for protecting me, for loving me enough to make sure I'd be okay. And I was okay, more than okay. I was free. As I walked out of my office and across the campus, I thought about the title of the story that had become my life. He signed the divorce papers mocking me, until the judge read my brother's will out loud. But that wasn't really the story at all. The real story was about a brother who loved his sister enough to protect her even after he was gone. About a woman who learned that her worth was never determined by someone else's ability to see it. About discovering that the richest things in life, love, kindness, purpose, freedom, can't be measured in dollars and cents. Marcus had spent years making me feel worthless while planning to discard me the moment it became convenient. He'd believed that success meant having more money than anyone else, that status meant looking down on people who had less. But Daniel had understood something Marcus never could. Real wealth is measured in the lives you touch, the love you share, the difference you make. Daniel had died with $24 million in the bank, but he'd lived like a man who knew money was just a tool, not a measure of worth. And me? I'd learned that being rich isn't about how much you have. It's about knowing your own value, regardless of anyone else's estimation. It's about using whatever resources you have, whether that's $20,000 or $24 million, to live authentically, to help others, to make your corner of the world a little better. If you've been listening to this story, I hope you'll take a moment to reflect. Have you ever let someone make you feel small? Have you ever measured your worth by external standards that don't really matter? Have you ever missed seeing the value in someone because you were too focused on the wrong things? Share your thoughts in the comments. And if this story moved you, if it made you think about what really matters in life, please subscribe to this channel. We share stories like this, stories about real human experiences, about growth and redemption and understanding, because we believe that these narratives help us all become more thoughtful, more compassionate, more aware of our own worth and the worth of others. 3 years after Daniel's death, I received a letter from one of the scholarship recipients. Her name was Lisa, and she'd used the scholarship to become the first person in her family to attend college. She'd just graduated with a degree in social work. I don't know if you remember me, she wrote, but I met you at the scholarship ceremony 3 years ago. You told me that someone believed in me and that now I should believe in myself. That conversation changed my life. I'm now working at the same community center where your brother worked. I'm helping kids who don't believe in themselves yet, just like he helped others. I'm trying to pass on what he gave me, not just the scholarship, but the belief that we're all capable of amazing things if someone just sees us, really sees us. I framed that letter and hung it on my office wall, right next to Daniel's picture, because that's what this story is really about. Not revenge, not money, not even divorce. It's about being seen, about seeing others. About understanding that every person you meet has value, has worth, has something to contribute whether or not you can see it immediately. Marcus spent 7 years looking at me and seeing a poor substitute teacher with nothing to offer him. Daniel looked at me and saw someone capable of changing the world. They were both looking at the same person. The difference was in the lens they chose to look through. I ended up keeping the house in San Diego that Daniel had left me. It's right on the beach, and sometimes on weekends I sit on the deck and watch the sunset and think about that conversation we had when we were 19, right after our parents died. "We're going to be okay, Sarah," Daniel had said, holding my hand as we watched the ocean. "I don't know how yet, but I know we will. We have each other, and that's enough." He'd been right. We'd been okay, more than okay. And now, even without him physically here, I'm still okay, because he made sure of it. Because he loved me enough to plan for my future even when his own was ending. Because he taught me by example that the measure of a life isn't in what you accumulate, but in what you give. Not in how others see you, but in how you see yourself. So here's my challenge to you if you've made it this far in this story. Look at the people in your life. Really look at them. See their value even if it's not immediately obvious, even if it doesn't fit the world's definition of success. Even if they're substitute teachers making $35,000 a year or social workers, driving 15-year-old Hondas, or anyone else whose worth isn't measured in obvious ways. Because you never know. That person you're dismissing might be richer than you could imagine, if not in money, then in all the ways that actually matter. And if you're someone who's been made to feel small, who's been told your contributions don't matter, who's been measured by someone else's limited standards and found wanting, remember this. Your worth was never theirs to determine. It was always yours. Live well. Live freely. Live joyfully, just like Daniel wanted, just like all of us deserve.